Now, you might think that the best melee infantry would be on Khorne's roster, given that he is supposed to be the melee powerhouse faction, but in fact, the best melee infantry in Total War Warhammer 3 is, in fact, the only dedicated melee infantry on that particular faction's roster. I am, of course, referring to the dreaded Forsaken of Tzeentch. Yes, that's right, folks. Barrier plus high armor, who would have expected, is very strong. Forsaken of Tzeentch have a number of other things going for them. They're immune to psychology baseline, which is quite nice. Won't get terror routed. Of course, with Frenzy, their stats do get charged up. Forsaken's main downside is their relatively squishy HP and melee defense. The armor does somewhat make up for that, but in the case of the Forsaken of Tzeentch in particular, that barrier allows them to take shock damage either from a charge or a volley while closing the distance to another enemy unit, when normally a unit of Forsaken might immediately start losing models because they would take so much damage. The Forsaken can absorb, the Forsaken of Tzeentch that is, can absorb that shock and continue fighting with most of their unit models more or less still at full HP. Now, they also have spell resistance of 40%, which is huge, all things considered, and magic attacks, which helps them trade well into all demonic infantry. Of course, just high overall weapon damage is a hallmark of Forsaken, what has made them good in the past, and that synergizes well with a number of other abilities for Tzeentch. Of course, Warp Flame gives minus 15 armor on contact, not to mention the spawn of Tzeentch also have armor Sundering, so that's minus 45 armor passively just from unit abilities. Of course, you've also got access to Lore of Metal, Plague of Rust, Overcast, minus 60 armor, or the regular cast for minus 30 will be quite nice. Exalted Lord of Change against Khorne here. It's myself versus Samurai Warrior. This is another replay from the tournament that happened by the time you're seeing this, maybe a week and a half ago or so. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway. Khorne versus Tzeentch. Myself coming in, of course, with Tzeentch. I've got the Exalted Lord of Change with 2 Forsaken of Tzeentch initially, 2 Pink Horrors, and 3 Blue Horrors in reserve, 2 Spawn, 2 Flamers, 3 more Forsaken, 3 Screamers, 2 Pink Horrors, and 2 more Blue Horrors. For Samurai Warrior's Khorne, he's coming in with an Exalted Bloodthirster. Definitely good to try and at least contest Tzeentch in the air. Khorne's one of the few factions that actually can. The Khorne Furies will trade well cost-effectively into Screamers and even into the Tzeentch Furies as well, so they're a pretty good choice here. He's got 4 of them in reserve, 4 Fleshhounds as well. Fleshhounds are the OP unit of Khorne, very cost-effective, good in every matchup. Definitely would like to see them here. A couple of Shielded Warriors also in reserve, 3 Bloodletters in reserve, and 1 Blood Crusher. The spell resistance, in particular the Blood Crushers, makes them a little bit more tanky. They're also cheaper than something like the Skull Crushers, which he does have in his starting army, alongside Halberds and 2 Cultists. So let's jump on in. Mountains of Morn is once again going to be the map for this particular clash, but Tzeentch Forsaken, they've got so much going for them. I would expect not only Barrier to get nerfed at some point, but maybe Tzeentch Forsaken specifically to maybe get their spell resistance tuned down. I'm not really sure exactly. That spell resistance won't come in particular handy in this matchup, though. Of course, Khorne lacking any kind of magic, you wouldn't expect a lot of AoE magic damage, which definitely is the case. But let's see what we can do. Tzeentch currently has the best air force in the game. Once we see some of the elven factions get added in with the integration, Wood Elves, High Elves with their Tempest, and Vampire Counts also with Storm of the Night on the Von Karstein Lord could contest Tzeentch in the air. Right now in Total War Warhammer 3, Khorne can kind of contest Tzeentch in the air. Again, the Furies are relatively cost-effective. The fact that you can take Bloodthirsters, both Exalted and Regular, to just give you that very heavy air punch absolutely counters most of what Tzeentch can bring to the table. Tzeentch really relies on magic and getting good engagements with Screamers, this anti-large AP of Screamers, or in this particular case, I'm not really planning on fighting in the air at all. I'm going to develop some spawn relatively quickly off of this point, and my goal is just to fly around and manually land anytime this Exalted Bloodthirster looks like he's going to come and try and hunt me down, and just kind of screen through the spawns, and generally try to avoid getting sniped with that extra mass and support. So, spawn being brought in, I'm split pushing the 2 side objectives here. Relatively even split. We've got Horrors and Forsaken on this side, 1 blue, 1 pink, and the Forsaken over here one additional blue horror, but more or less the same. So for the time being, I'm going to contest. Samurai Warriors also, rather than just going directly for the center objective, is also going to bring all of his resources to bear. Because I'm split pushing, this does mean that he's going to be able to concentrate more value here, and I'll likely end up losing this engagement, but I'm still going to contest here. Even if I can just get some damage against the Bloodthirster, you know, maybe catch him up against the spawn, maybe get some missile fire in on him. Regardless, the Bloodthirster is definitely very scary for me to have to deal with, so we're going to, again, manually land here with the spawn. The Bloodthirster drops in through the trees, knocks down poor Exalted Big Bird, but he pops right back up very fast and is going to pop back up in the air. Meanwhile, the Furies come in. They're going to get an attack on the pink horrors, start to wear through their barrier. These Forsaken had a nice engagement against Fleshhounds. One thing, Forsaken with the magic damage, the Tzeentch Saken here, especially trading well into Fleshhounds, given their low armor and sort of low defensive stats. It's really good to countercharge them, actually. We also get a nice final transmutation here. Unfortunately, the Blood Crushers, Skull Crushers rather, do move away before the effect fully hits, but it did get some damage on those two cultists there, and obviously on the Fleshhounds as well, despite their magic resistance, but a big engagement with Exalted Big Bird and the spawns here. We've actually got Plague of Rust on that Exalted Thirster, so I'm going to go ahead and maneuver out of combat with the, again, just screen through the spawn here. The spawn are thick enough to at least hold up the Bloodthirster temporarily, and all of his armor has been sundered down to 0, of course, between the Plague of Rust and the spawn's attacks, so looking pretty good so far there. That being said, I am still horrendously losing this engagement. The two Bloodletter summons in particular really just swung things very heavily in Khorne's favor, so we are eventually going to forsake these Forsaken, and despite all of that, they still have traded cost-effectively, just about paid for themselves. Yeah, not in a good engagement at all, you could say. The Skull Crushers with AP heavy damage can definitely get rid of the Tzeentch Saken here, and they will do just that as Bloodthirster cleans up the rest of the spawn. Meanwhile, out on the far side, I have fully capped this objective, and because I was contesting with superior numbers of infantry, also remember that summons can't capture, right? We actually did manage to almost capture objective number 3, but Samurai Warrior manages to flip it over to his side. Regardless, I've got a slight lead on tickets. Exalted Lord of Change here comes to interrupt some of these Khorne Warriors from getting in the center, and I'm going to push back and try and meet the depleted forces of the Blood God on the objective number 2. Bloodthirster's coming in, so Big Bird runs for more support. We got more spawn coming in and more Forsaken as well. Definitely want to start developing quite a few melee units. The Flamers will be nice also to try and take down the Bloodthirster if I can get him in the right situation, but I'm not going to bring out the Flamers yet just because with the Skull Crushers and the Fleshhounds still on the field, Samurai Warrior's got quite a bit of scary mobility to come. And this is probably the most vulnerable Exalted Lord of Change has been the whole battle. He does take a big attack there, but thankfully for me, Exalted Bloodthirster gets distracted by the Tzeentch Saken. So once again, they're going to be forced into a bad situation, but we do have some horrors now in range to try and start shooting here. I've also got my own summoned Furies from the Lord of Change to come in and just harass and annoy and even just tie down the Bloodthirster, distract him momentarily, which would be good enough in and of itself. We got the Flamers now, since I've got a nice presence of more Forsaken, and especially the spawn to try and control the mass of the Bloodthirster. Not too worried about bringing in this decently valued missile unit to try and deal some strong damage in this choke. You guys have probably seen, if you watched the tournament, there were some live games. I think Aerocrastic versus Anticity, Aero ran into a similar situation with his elite cab in this same choke, I want to say, against Flamers, which is definitely a very painful situation to be in. You can see the blue horrors are shooting in. Flamers aren't quite firing yet, but the blue and pink fire is coming in. It is subject to missile block chance, but look at that armor sundering between Plague of Rust once again and sundered armor. Those Skull Crushers down to only 34. Absolutely brutal stuff. A big final transmutation here as well to try and finish off the cultists. Also does some pretty good damage to the Exalted Bloodthirster as well. But Hounds are threatening. They're just going to get completely roasted. Huge ranged shock damage, but they do still make contact with the Flamers there and are going to be immediately breaking through the barrier. Flamers are extremely flimsy once their barrier is gone especially, so Despite my efforts to protect them, get them online against the Bloodthirster, they have been taken out. But periphery objectives, there's not really too much going on here. Samurai Warrior looked like he maybe wanted to cap objective number 1, but instead committing his resources in the center to just try and win the fight, which I definitely respect. In Domination, oftentimes, if you can get far enough ahead on army damage value, you can pretty much win regardless, as long as you remember to actually cap the objectives. So both of us are just trying to do that at this point, and we've traded relatively evenly so far. But I am starting to pull slightly ahead, if ever so slightly. More Tzeentch Seiken coming in, trying to bail out those horrors. Pink Horrors taking huge damage from the Furies and the Flesh Hounds there. But more spells going to be popped. Looks like another Searing Doom on this nice bunched-up pocket of Khorne Infantry. Those Khorne Warriors in particular, with their heavy armor, will take quite a bit of damage from that. And look at this, these Skull Crushers just in sustained melee combat still with that Armor Sunder and a single cast Plague of Rust down to 67 armor. Just been beat down by the spawn there, which has been very, very cost-effective for me. But even still, I'm at risk of losing the center objective because Samurai is holding me kind of back from it. And he's got more units on it for the time being. He's also sending some more Flesh Hounds to try and actually cap objective number 1. He needs to try and go for a 3 cap relatively soon. I mean, I'm not too far ahead yet at this point where he would be needing to 3 cap, but certainly if he can claw his way back very quickly. More Searing Doom's going to be cast down, and one thing about the Lord of Change, Exalted Lord of Change, he can sling spells so quickly with that little ability recharge time. Every time he casts a spell, it basically just like has less cooldown. Did I actually even bring that ability? No, I guess Searing Doom just really has that sort of cooldown. Anyway, yeah, a little bit of a Tzeentch bombardment here. The army ability also going to come in, trying not to hit my own troops as much as possible, but just finish off this center of support troops here. And now finally we get a bead on the Exalted Bloodthirster. Hopefully, maybe, throw a little bit of pink fire at him. This other unit of Flamers too. Try and get in position to finish him off. And, I mean, at this point, he probably would have died to the spawn anyway. But just really to put the nail in the coffin here, we're going to come in with the Flamers and finish him off. Sundered Armor, Warp Flame, all the different effects really making it not matter at all that I don't actually have a ton of direct armor piercing in this build. Just high damage overall with great armor sundering synergy. Lord of Change decides to finish it in the air himself, which with his barrier, he won't actually end up taking much damage at all here, so that's just fine. Yeah, give him the sparks. That's right. That's right. I can't tell. That's not actually a matched animation, is it? Nope. Anyway, Bloodthirster goes down there. You can see the Cultist also shattered with 1 HP. That is pretty impressive that he survived, all things considered. And with that, it's almost a back-breaking blow. Maybe not quite, but still. Samurai Warrior is going to be getting quite a bit of extra supply, but that's a lot of value to have lost out on at this point. Going to now just bring in some Screamers as reinforcements to come in, excuse me, on these objectives. Just pressure the Flesh Hounds, not allow them to, you know, fight 1v1. But at this point, I really just need to hold this center objective, and everything else is more or less just window dressing. But because I want to fight, I'm going to go fight still. Lord of Change coming over, trying to save his Screamer bros. Nice rear charge in here to these squishy demons. The Lord of Change is just a really strong combatant for how strong of a caster he is. Definitely one of the best hybrid caster fighters we've ever seen in Total War Warhammer, which seems appropriate for Tzeentch. You know, that super charged up Arcane Conduit. Only 10% spell mastery. It might not seem like much, but every little bit of extra helps. And considering that the Winds of Magic costs for the spells are the same, you're just getting more value right out of it, as opposed to something like a Herald, although the Herald's shooting attack can be very good in some matchups. We'll look at him another day. I definitely think that the Herald is very strong as well, and both Lord choices have niche applications. Even Kairos also. If you want Penumbral Pendulum, which is currently extremely broken, but even after it gets fixed, will probably still be pretty strong. Kairos is also a pretty good option, so nice to see from Tzeentch that all their Lord choices seem to be quite strong at their intended purpose. One thing in this matchup why you wouldn't want the Herald is because the Bloodthirster can contest you in the air. Like, I mean, this guy is already vulnerable enough, and he's a pretty good combatant, as I mentioned. Just in comparison to an Exalted Bloodthirster, he's not quite there. but a Herald will get trashed pretty quickly. And while the Herald is quicker, it will require a lot of micro to stay out in front. And I don't know, I just think in matchups where your opponent can't really contest you in the air, such as Kislev or Slaanesh, that's going to be a much better case for the Herald. He can just sit up in the air on his disc, sling fire, and spells down on his opponent below. But for the time being, we're just going to fast forward as the end has pretty much come. Samurai Warrior is going to go and capture this center objective, but it won't end up mattering too much because I'm just so far ahead on points. Again, all I need to do is hold objective number 1 even at this point. And we've got some pink horrors docked. Somebody asked me, can you actually dock on cliff sides in this game? And the answer is sometimes, if it's been allowed by the map makers, you know, the developers creating the map, if they put in actual dock zones, then yes, you can on some of the Domination maps dock on these cliffs overlooking some objectives, which is pretty nice. It's pretty decent. I haven't used it too much, honestly. It's a little niche, but it's there, and it's fun. And Tzeentch also, if we check in here, we'll look after the fact, but the thing is, with all this armor sundering, they can trade well into most targets, and almost any infantry unit in this game they'll run into, they can trade pretty decently against. Sometimes they won't necessarily trade the best in a direct frontal charge, but even still, especially with all of the support of Tzeentchian magic, they are such a strong unit to have in your arsenal. And in general, I mean, the worst performance I think we're going to see here is possibly 875. I guess this one here, 745 still, but like 1620 for this unit, absolutely ridiculous. I might have even summoned them twice, but even if I did, that's still pretty cost effective at the end of the day. This one here, 1497, 879, 1199, and this is again against a faction that is billed as one of the best melee factions in the game, which they certainly are. Khorne is no joke fighting in close combat, but the Tzeentch Forsaken are not either, and with the support of Tzeentchian missiles and magic, they stand above the rest of the game's infantry. In my mind, heads and shoulders and horns, because they do have all three. Anyway, the spawn also come in. There's kind of synergy and damage also is quite nice here, even though the flamers don't do all that much damage themselves. Just the pressure of them kind of drawing more mobile units out of Khorne into unfavorable engagements ended up being pretty decent. The screamers, I mean, they're also kind of just here for fast reinforcements, for a little bit of extra anti-large, but the Forsaken are definitely the backbone of this kind of Tzeentch melee army, right? Which is something that I didn't think was going to be super viable, but definitely the combination of the fact that you have the armor sundering with so many different ways to accomplish that, and the high DPS output of the Forsaken and the spawn and such, it actually does work pretty well, all things considered. So, well played to Samurai Warrior. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching that one. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.